Dying is bad. Most cultures agree that to die before one's time is tragic, and most animals will avoid things that will directly lead to their death by instinct alone. The same basic assumptions are true in D&D worlds too. Even the most heinous of D&D monsters are often just creatures seeking shelter, food, survival, or just to avoid their own death. But is death actually a bad thing in Dungeons & Dragons? That's a little harder to say. This video is going to have 3 parts. Part 1 discusses the rules text of 5th edition as to what happens in various kinds of death situations. Part 2 will look at what happens when the average person dies, including some kind of better scenarios and some worse ones. And Part 3 is going to discuss quite how bad death actually is in D&D, with some thought to ethics and the cultural perspectives therein. This is not intended to be exhaustive or deal with some of the more complex issues in death ethics, like assisted dying, self-inflicted death, death sentences more generally, or war, except in the most surface and broad cases. But with all that said, what actually happens to a person who dies in a world playing by D&D's rules? First, there is a soul and an animating spirit, but we're ignoring that for the purposes of this video. The soul is part of what is restored to a body through a variety of different resurrection spells, which are available in the rules text of the game. These spells represent the slow distancing of body and soul after death, with more complex and powerful magic being used to hew them together after more time has passed, or the body is in a greater state of disrepair. What happens to one's soul after death depends on a number of factors. The Dungeon Master's Guide states that deities often claim souls. This allows the soul passage to the pocket of the planes inhabited by said deity, a part of the fields of Elysium, the Beastlands, or such like. If your soul is claimed by another kind of entity, it could go to any number of other places, from the far realms to the hells to the abyss. Depending on the setting, there are various different wrinkles and processes. For example, in the Forgotten Realms, all souls go to the City of the Dead to be judged by Kelemvor. They're not all just claimed by gods out of some bucket of souls. And the Faithless in the Forgotten Realms again join the Wall of the Faithless, those who are unclaimed. They end up eventually becoming part of a great screaming wall of brick and mortar souls, essentially, which sounds like quite the suffering existence. By contrast, the official 5th edition texts imply that unclaimed souls, instead of going to a Wall of the Faithless, actually go to the lower planes to become sort of soul larvae. Believe it or not, this is pretty much all that is said in the core texts of 5th edition about the process of death and dying and the transition of the soul into the afterlife. So now we're going to look at some things that could happen to your soul when you die if you're not careful. First, you could turn into a spirit. If you have unfinished business, you can become a ghost. If you're an evil person who dies violently, you become a will-o'-wisp. If you're a temptress or tempter elf, you become a banshee. And if your soul is barred from passing to the afterlife, you can become a spectre. Or if you're a person who is massively debauched in life, or enters into a fiendish pact and gathers a significant amount of negative energy around you, you can collapse on death into a literal black hole of evil, and then you become a wraith. Shadows, interestingly, despite being undead, don't count here. They have nothing to do with the soul. They are instead the stolen shadows of dead people, as evidenced by the fact that if you resurrect the victim of a shadow who has risen themselves as a shadow, the person will then proceed not to have their own shadow. It's been taken from them, but the soul is still intact. You could instead be trapped trapped after death, as happens when one is killed by a lich or a night hag, although you do have to be evil for the night hag's case to take effect. This entrapment of the soul usually precedes a different magical process. In the hag's case, they're going to take you to Hades, and in the lich's case, they're going to consume and destroy utterly any soul trapped in its phylactery for 24 hours. Quick side note, the rules text states that only a deity can restore such a completely and utterly destroyed soul to life, which is interesting because how? I guess this means that deities have the power to recreate souls that have been ripped to shreds and are no longer in existence, sort of creation ex nihilo of people and souls, which begs the question, why aren't they doing that for their, most faithful followers who die in tragic ways, or, just for regular people to bolster up their worship numbers? It's an interesting one. Maybe it takes too much divine energy, but still, the fact that gods have the power to restore the victim of complete and utter destruction of the soul to life is an interesting implication. Death giants, specifically the shrouded ones from Bigby's Glory of the Giants, also count here. They are described as wearing a shroud made from a torrent of souls. It's not totally clear where they get them, outside of secret Raven Queen magic, but they're there. Another option for where your soul goes after death is that you've already signed it away. Many beings are more than willing to call dibs on your soul. At the moment, these include all sorts of fiends, fae, or elder gods, but also liches and masters of death magic more generally. The kind of notion of the depths, perhaps creatures like krakens and other lords of the depths. Cursed sentient weapons, celestials, elemental genies, and also just powerful undead for good measure. So, in theory, your soul could be claimed by an agent of almost any plane in the cosmos, from the Feywild to the Shadowfell to the Astral even, as long as there's a deal on the line. So, in sum, monsters can transfigure you in death to some new form. Bad life circumstances can change the shape and fate of your soul into something undead. Creatures from all sides of the planar spectrum can claim you, or you can be destroyed utterly, but also maybe undestroyed. And you can make deals with anything from a cursed crossbow to Cthulhu. It sounds like a lot, but your average person isn't being courted by dark forces or stolen away by a night hag. What does death outside the confines of dramatic adventuring life look like? As I've discussed in my video on D&D's strange polytheism, the system seems to lean towards some form of charismatic henotheism, wherein clerical leaders representing individual deities try to build their own semi-cultic followings in the style of ancient mystery cults, while the common folk tend to venerate the vast pantheon of gods and come to these mystery cults or charismatic leaders in times of struggle when they need something miraculous or unusual to be done for them very quickly. Even given the fact that these representatives of the gods that are given divine magic can literally do miracles and, your basic healing the sick or fixing some of life's worst circumstances, poisons, diseases, and even fixing death in many cases, if they're powerful enough, the average person in a D&D styled world is probably going to die of very similar things to people in our own history. The vast majority will die to some form of infectious disease. It's perhaps a little too much to expect forces of clerics and paladins to sweep through the lands in response almost instantly to some vast growing infectious pandemic, especially if diagnostic tools are not quite as advanced as we do see in the game. It's very difficult to use magic to diagnose an illness. War, infant mortality, and death by monster would all also be significant considerations in how the average person might die. Well, life, really, is about pleasing and appeasing the gods. And so if you are to die in glorious battle, or die as an innocent infant, or, at least young enough so that you've not done any of the really bad depravities, or as some tragic victim of a surprise devilish incursion, it's very plausible that some god may pay you enough attention to take pity on you and welcome you into their fold. If you're not special in some way, then one of the best things you can do to get a god's attention and guarantee yourself a good place in the afterlife is to try and die in a way that aligns with the values of a certain favoured deity of your own. So let's look at a couple of fairly normal examples. One, a youngish nursemaid working in the family home of the local lord, who is currently dying of dysentery. And two, a farm labourer who is going to die in battle, following his landlord's banner. Both are worshipful individuals. Both have paid their respects to various gods throughout their lives for good harvests, good health, good weather, and safe travels. When she got sick, the family for whom the nursemaid works has summoned a cleric from their patron deity's faith from the big city to come and tend to her. They care for her. They wish her to have the best treatment. This is despite the fact that the girl would probably have preferred to contact the wise woman in the village just down the road where she grew up, a woman with knowledge of the ancient ways of the woods. But as the cleric is taking a little too long to arrive from the big city, and her condition is steadily worsening, the family has no choice but to summon the wise woman of the woods to the large manor house anyway. The wise woman wants to conduct a proven ritual in the standing stones just outside of her village, deep in the woods. But unfortunately at this point the young nursemaid is just too weak to move. So the ritual is conducted inside the manor house of the lord, with all of the proper herbs and ritual incenses gathered nonetheless. It is all done correctly, but it is to no avail. You see, the Fey Lord of the forest is too far from the manor house, and too annoyed at the long-dead ancestors of the Lord's family to think about aiding a ritual that takes place within that house. And the family's patron deity only favours them because of their ancestors' blood oath. That makes the direct descendants of their line under the protection of this patron, not a random nursemaid. And so when she dies, the nursemaid's soul goes to the judging and falls through the cracks between the patron family who were protecting her and the old god of the woods who she worshipped for quite some time. Neither claims her. Her soul is thus left. Her only hope, then, that she worshipped her pantheon well and was a good person. No personalised afterlife being taken into the bosom of a god who she worships greatly. For her, if she's lucky, and she's been good, she might find herself a petitioning soul on the very outskirts of one of the upper planes. To our farmhand turned soldier, he's dutifully worshipped gods of hearth, home and harvest for all of his life. He's recently sought out a temple of a minor fertility god for the reason of helping with his wife's difficult pregnancy. When called to fight under his landlord's banner, he quickly sought out the war priest and got himself availed of a blessing by the priest's war god for the coming fight. Unfortunately, this would be his first and final battle. After an act of great selfless bravery, he finds himself face to face with a mounted knight, having saved 3 of his allies, younger men all. He finds himself cut down in the heat of battle by this knight, but not before he takes the life of the knight with him. It is a glorious victory, a true act of heroism and selflessness, if on the most minor of scales. Yet, sometimes these most minor of self-sacrifices and nobilities get the gods to notice. Perhaps all those who die in honour in battle, who are blessed by the war priest's god, find themselves in the same afterlife, the hallowed halls of the warrior. They have been claimed by the Lord of War, whose fealty they swore to by taking his blessing. But this is awful. Our petitioner has no relationship really with this god of war. This was his first fight. He has far stronger ties to gods of harvest and home, and the fertility god who he sought out to aid his wife's bringing new life into the world. He would be happy in an afterlife that contained his wife and soon-to-be child, but that seems unlikely now. He is in the hallowed halls of the warrior with a collection of other, perhaps bewildered, perhaps overjoyed soldiering types. He's been cut off from all bonds of his previous life, not only by death, but by his selection of afterlife, which was not even his choice to make. He's been consigned to Isgard. His only hope of seeing his family ever again is if his as yet unborn daughter joins him one day in the warrior's hall, a fate he would likely not wish upon her. The trouble with being normal in D&D is that you're not exactly sure which gods are playing what games and which gods are even paying attention with regards to your own soul. You're not granted power by some deity or archfey, you're not beholden to a sacred oath, or you're not dying in the process of achieving a task which will aid some powerful being greatly so they can claim your soul for them. You're just a guy trying to do well in life and trying to venerate those deities that make material impacts upon it. It is impossible to say which deity has the strongest claim to your soul, or if you're worshipping in multiple pantheons, which pantheon has the claim to your soul. And the only way you can really ascertain that is by devoting yourself to one of these holy orders sort of mystery cult things that are spreading up, so you can absolutely hyper-focus on definitely pleasing one deity who hopefully you can bring your entire family to meet in the afterlife. And that's risky in itself. Being beholden to just one entity leaves you really vulnerable to, devilish deception, all sorts of mistakes that one might make. Maybe the hedge priest that leads you into this group doesn't quite know that the act that you committed when you were 5 years old in betraying your brother automatically loses you the favour of their deity, meaning that you will be unclaimed if you follow this deity to a singularity, if they are not a deity that allows for redemption or forgiveness. The main realization really is that the afterlife experience is entirely and completely, almost always divorced from your worldly experience. In almost every case, the goal of a soul in one of D&D's afterlives is to morally perfect itself in accordance with the alignment of the plane that they find themselves on. This quest is inherently selfish and leads petitioners on a journey of death of ego and eventually becoming homogeneous as a member of alignment, a member of the plane, a member of the space that one finds oneself in, and eventually subsumed into it, becoming nothing but the ground of the plane. It is the ultimate moral purity. It is refining the soul into something that is morally pure, or at least alignmentally pure, or that fits the vibe of somewhere like Elysium. So with all that said, death seems a pretty raw deal. You're never quite sure where you're going to end up, unless you're some deity's most specialist chosen one, or you make a deal to sell your soul to a specific guy. And even when you get there, the complexity of the selection of people by deities, the complexity of dying well, dying poorly, all of the different things that can go wrong in your life, all of the crimes you may commit, sins against certain gods, means that you're not sure that you're going to have any worldly connections in the afterlife you go to anyway. It's very, very unlikely, with the number of gods, the number of pantheons, the number of mistakes a normal person can make in their life, that any two people are going to find themselves in community, in concert with each other, in the same place. Basically, for anyone who's not a player character, a cleric, or a cultist, death seems like the ultimate evil in a D&D world. Truly. It is complete abandonment of anything that was before until you are refined down to something that is not free and absorbed into the very place that you were dragged to by your own actions. Even in the most glorious of upper planes, that still seems like a rough fate. This is, however, assuming quite a modern Western interpretation of what is an ethical good. The process as described really is exceedingly Buddhist, with a little bit of Dante's Divine Comedy mixed in. You certainly could read this as a good thing, or you could read it as being selected for yet another test of your purity that you have to achieve, because otherwise your mind will be sharpened away, your individuality will be honed off, and you will become a grand cog in the machine of whatever deity plucked you out of that festering pit. You get selected to do a test by not being tempted by a dark deal and knowing exactly where you're going to go in the end. It's like a final exam of your life. Is this a good thing? Well, it does mean that, unlike with most religious ethics, we don't actually have to worry about the possibilities of eternal bliss or eternal torture. Very little in D&D's afterlife system is actually eternal. There is a definite end for the petitioning soul, absorption into the very land itself, which by an attempt to read the rules in the best way possible seems to be about a 200 years timescale, considering true resurrection has that as its time limit. It seems after 200-ish years, a soul is likely to have become part of the furniture. Unless a deity decides otherwise, or your soul transfigures into something new, like a new devil in the hells. I realise this is something of a simplification, but it is about all we've got time for in this already overlong video. The key takeaway really is that death, the afterlife in D&D, is not eternal, which changes an awful lot. Even if you're transfigured into an imp from a lemur and begin rising the ranks of the devilry, there will eventually become a point where your devilish form is killed in the 9 hells. And that's it for you. So what we're actually seeing is a finite process by which a soul slowly comes into alignment with its resting place, losing ego, prior free will, and to some extent personhood as well. This is no Christian-styled heaven. So being non-infinite, giving a chance for resurrection if you are deemed worthy of it on the material plane, and you choose to go, and having something of a time limit, a seemingly 200-year time limit before you are gone from an ensouled existence. If that's true for everyone, death doesn't really seem that bad in D&D. It is an opportunity for personal growth and the refinement of the soul until one loses all worldly attachments and becomes part of this new plane that you are in. You become so close to your deity, so close to the land they stand on, the air they breathe, that you become the land they stand on, the air they breathe, losing all forms of individual consciousness and becoming a individual consciousness with the world which they are capable of shaping. This raises an additional question. If all souls are destroyed or absorbed in the end, why is the destruction of a soul such a taboo? Like what liches do? Or why is signing your soul off to the devils a bad thing? Well, in the first case, you could argue that your soul no longer contributes to any of the vast tapestry of the planes. Your life has essentially been snuffed out and there is no growth, no meaning that comes out of it. But with the latter, I mean, you could potentially argue that you are, eventually when you die, you are bolstering a part of the armies of the damned, if they are damned, or bolstering a part of the lower planes. But you were going to become a petitioner somewhere anyway. Why does it matter if you're climbing the steps up to Mount Celestia, seeking, meditation, perfection of the soul along the way, or seeking perfection of your bureaucratic backstabbing skills as an imp in the dread legions of some devil lord? Yes, on a personal level, you could be a lump of soul until you die, like a constantly downtrodden lemure. Lemure? Is it Lemure? I'm not re-recording all of this. If it is Lemure, just know that. Or you could be turned into some sort of soul coin, which do seem like objectively bad options. But generally, if you're the sort of person who is ambitious enough to sign your soul off to the devil anyway, I think they're probably going to have some use for your ambitious ass somewhere in the armies of the hells. Compared to the slow erasure of everything that is you, everything that makes you a person, becoming some restless spirit on the material plane or the ethereal plane after death doesn't seem that bad by comparison for those who wish to prolong their life and prolong their self. Transfiguring after death into a restless ghost, an imp, under the thumb of some great devil, who you hope to overthrow eventually someday, of course you do, because you're a devil, or, some lesser angel, or a dryad, or nature spirit more generally, transfigured by the powerful entity that has claimed your soul, transfigured into something that has potential to continue its life, seems like a pretty solid option. After all sorts of powerful outsiders, from deities to archfey to devils, have demonstrated the power to transfigure their followers' souls into new creatures, into creatures of the plane that they inhabit, allowing them to continue in the, what the Buddhists would term the cycle of samsara, allowing them to continue living and existing as an ensouled creature within the system of the planes. This gives you a chance to experience more of the world, experience more of the planes, experience more life, until you are ready, or perhaps, to leave the cycle of samsara, the cycle of eternal suffering, the cycle of reincarnation and remoulding of the soul. You are able to leave one's ego behind and move into nothing. In any case, the key takeaway is this: in D&D, death is either the first step on the next adventure that you're going to take as some other form of creature, or a step towards that final test of your soul, which eventually results in you finishing your purgatory and ceasing to exist as an individual creature, an individual soul. If you're ready for the latter one, then congratulations. But if you're not, you'd better entreat and beg whatever powerful creature that has plucked you out of the soul bucket that they give you that next chance to serve under them, to learn, and eventually accept that final test that brings you out to lie as part of the world. The end of all souls is equally inevitable. All souls become part of the furniture eventually, unless you're completely and utterly destroyed by a lich, or become part of a death giant's cool coat, I guess. A quick addendum: I've just discovered that the Barghest also has the ability to permanently destroy souls like the lich, because they can consume the body and soul of a dead creature and then digest it, digesting a soul, leading to its utter destruction and inability to be resurrected by anything but divine intervention, again, like the Lich. Which, this topic, I may have bitten off slightly too much. Nonetheless, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I'm back to trying to get one out every single Monday, so if you do want to be updated when a new video goes live, please do subscribe and do all the lovely YouTube things. I really do massively appreciate it. But, yeah, with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.